Hi everyone, my name is Tori Meiswinkle. I'm looking at rural and low-income users. To begin, I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach to introducing my group. I read and etc. But the best way to describe this group, and to me any group, is to learn from someone that's living it. So with a very service-oriented mindset, I wanted to learn from those who personally deal with the challenges, a very first-hand anthropological approach. So a quick glimpse into choosing this user group and some of the challenges that they face so that you can see on a real level what some of the things that these users deal with on a day-to-day basis, as well as make some conclusions for yourself about how to best serve them and some of the existing services that are in place. My family actually comes from a farming Amish town in rural Pennsylvania. The closest physical library is 20 minutes away from the center of town. Many of the people in my town that I spoke to never used the library because of the distance and the time that it took to visit it. With most parents milking 3 times a day, parents didn't have any time, and many didn't make the money that kids needed to be able to go into town. This became an increasing concern during the recession, and as gas prices increased, less people were able to make it into town to go to the library and follow through with the services that were available for these users. Many times those who could get to the library did so maybe twice a month. Most of them it was actually only once a month. I know for us when we were little we went grocery shopping. That was the big thing, is everybody goes into town, drives a half-hour trip so that they can go get groceries once a month. And that was when we could go to the library. This was of course after school or on weekends when the library was either closing or we would sometimes miss it when we got out of events, meaning that we could not be involved with the programs in the library. On top of that, there was a challenge getting books because of the late fees that would come into play. So sometimes not getting a book was the only option for budgetary concerns because they would not be back for another month, and the library only allowed books to be gone for 3 weeks, 21 days, something to that extent, depending on which library you were going to. These were just some of the things that the rural users, at least in my own town and others that I spoke to in other towns, faced on a day-to-day basis. This town, like many other rural towns, is highly composed of senior users, many who stopped farming and self-proclaimed being bored, looking to reading to help fill the hours. My grandmother absolutely loved to read, but at 84, she couldn't drive all the way into town to get a book when she wanted to. So this is where the county bookmobile came into play. There's actually a truck that comes to the small surrounding towns because it is such a rural area and a rural county that visits these towns once a month. And this is where the once-a-month rentals were allowed, so that people could get their books for the entire month. Of course, the bookmobile is mainly composed of large print fiction items that were historical fiction and westerns. The bookmobile was fantastic, and it saved a lot of people, especially those older users that were dealing with the low income after stopping farming years ago. But the thing was, there really wasn't much available. There wasn't a large children's selection, there wasn't a lot of selection for adults. There pretty much wasn't anything that wasn't set in the 19th century Wyoming. So the bookmobile actually, it would come during a weekday, and it would come in the morning while children were in school and parents were at work. Many of the area children didn't get the same experience with reading and with literacy as other children do in larger, more urban areas. The focus in the area that we came from, and from what I've read, most rural areas, is on sustainability. It's very career-oriented and practical skills versus academic learning. Recently, more students have gone on to post-secondary school, but for the most part, most of the teens and the youth and the people in the area end up doing a BOCES program, and they go into the workforce or they start working on the farm. There are very few who actually go on to do a really intense higher education degree. I was actually one of only 12 in a group of 70 that ended up going on to even try to get my bachelor's. Now that may change in the future for some of these people, but for the most part, there really isn't a huge focus on literacy and academic learning in the area. The community and those like it, like I said, it's sadly a lack of focus, not because of a want, but more of a need base and a lack of resources. Like I said, these and other challenges really spurned my desire to look at low-income and rural users to see if there are any ideas out there already being looked at to remedy some of these challenges that they face, and if so, how they're being implemented. So the place to start seems to be to talk about the definition of rural. The Lolita Fayens Small and Rural Libraries Conference uses serving under 25,000 users as their condition for winning their awards. The government actually has 15 different definitions for rural, so pick whichever one you want there. The Institute of Museum and Library Services seems to have the best definition that I've seen, and they label rurality as fringe, distant, and remote according to distance from an urbanized center. So fringe is equal to or less than 5 miles from an urbanized center. Distant is greater than 5 and less than 25 miles, and remote is greater than 25 miles. This is just something to think about on your own. How would you guys categorize rural? Would this be something that you base on population, something that you base on distance, or some other factor? What do you picture in your head when you hear the term rural? Because there really is no consensus anywhere about what a specific rural user is. It's very geographically dependent. But to move on, the ALA states that 60% of libraries across the country serve a community smaller than 20,000 individuals. They also state that 69% of those libraries claim to not have enough public computers for demand, which I thought was an interesting statistic just to briefly show the high amount of challenges that these users face. This is really a staggering number, but there are more interesting numbers found on page 8 and 9 of the Executive Summary of the Public Library Funding and Technology Access Study that's linked below. In addition, go ahead and take a quick look at pages 3 and 4 of the State of Small and Rural Libraries in the U.S. by the Institute of Museum and Library Services that's also linked below. It has some great information in it. For example, the study actually states that 43.8% of New York public libraries are serving rural users. And again, that's according to their definition of rural. Over half of the rural libraries serve communities less than 2,500 people. Now, of course, these urbanized centers are going to employ more librarians than small towns will, but that's a very interesting thing to think about, that half of the libraries in New York State, a little less than half, are serving rural users, and a quarter basically is what we're looking at, are going to serve communities less than 2,500 people. Some of the most interesting ideas that I saw being recently discussed at conferences were to work with the community and possibly get children really involved with the actual reading of books. So to increase a focus on literacy where there hasn't been one in many years, and having recreations of books or plays or skits and costumes, and working with local schools and production centers to put these performances on to get these students really interested in reading, learning, and all that the library can offer. The other thing was to really focus on local history, because like I said, many of these rural communities are families that have been there for generations. Focusing on local history and displaying these types of, they're really memorabilia for the area. If someone were to come to me and say, oh, I have some stuff from 1600 Warren Center, I'd say, oh yes, my family was there. What is going on with this? And it would be something that I would be able to take my son to and show him what happened in his past. So that was something that I could really identify with when they talked about it. But another idea was to try to become involved with national groups, to use popular branding that has already occurred or that they are paying for so that you don't have to, and it's a good way to reach out for those who are on the internet, on social media, and etc., and pull them into the library and show them, hey, you can use this, there are these services available, just a way to get people in the door. The Lolita Fayenne Conference in Michigan, they have a conference, the link is below, for rural and small libraries every year, and they specifically discuss things that are going on in the areas. And they really have it right. We really need to continue with organizations such as the Association for Rural and Small Libraries as a whole, but also have a state focus. Things that affect rural libraries here in New York are going to be quite different than things that are going to affect rural libraries in Georgia or New Mexico or any of the other areas in the country. We really need to bring a focus back to the individual states, to promote the organization of a committee to hold annual meetings, to raise funds, to put on these important meetings. The ALA has actually laid out some great information on how to search for funding for these rural areas, because they understand that such a large number of the libraries are rural and low-income users, and therefore they're starting to focus a little bit more on this user group. Like I said, the Association for Rural and Small Libraries is a very great resource for existing services. They link to specific ideas, they house conference proceedings, there are handouts and presentations about the ideas and the things that individual librarians are doing. It may not be as academic as something that is put into a journal article, but these are first-hand accounts from librarians that are working day to day and what's working for them. It may not be a published article in that extent, but there's some really great information in there, and it's an easy way to see who is working with this user group and the academic community that is looking into how to better assist rural and low-income users. One of the particularly thoughtful ideas was the venture of open meetings. The idea of open meetings is extremely important for rural libraries. The users come a great distance to the library, and they normally come to a library with a specific purpose in mind, which seems to be increasingly true as the cost of traveling and gas prices continues to increase. And speaking with users from different rural areas, they're spending less time at the library due to these economical pressures. In this type of atmosphere, it's paramount to make sure that the user's desires are being filled, which leads to an important of meetings with the user group being very involved, a very needs assessment-based approach. This is something that can benefit all libraries, but also comes with its own challenges. The top 10 mistakes to be made with the Open Meetings Act, mentioned by Foster Swift, it's a law firm in Michigan, has some interesting information on how to deal with open meetings in the library. This information that anyone in a rural library should know, but helpful for everyone. The link is actually below. That's part of the discussion. It's something that is really great for any user group and a good reference for you to have in the future. I really enjoyed it. On top of reading the literature, I had some in-depth conversation with rural users and produced some interesting ideas on how to break the barrier from their perspective to get more users into the library and to make the trip into town to be able to go to the library. One of the most popular was more about the aesthetics of the library rather than the actual selection that was available. So many people wanted a place that they could go to read, looking for an experience, not necessarily an individual book or a service that was available. Many mentioned a coffee service, though, and a comfortable space to read and research, especially those that were looking to have a place outside of the house to go and relax, again, looking for that experience. They mentioned that it could be a relaxing place, basically a mini vacation. For them, many can't afford family vacations and can't be away from the milking for long periods of time or any of the other things that they've got going on, so a small relaxing place outside of the home is desirable. And of course, we all face we need more access to the internet and more computers. In conclusion, the more I see the suggestions by different researchers and conference proceedings, it seems that with rural users, the group is so very large and diverse that it truly needs to be broken down and looked at by a case-by-case basis, that there should be some training on the basics of serving these users, but that individual meetings are a great resource to bring together librarians and communities. Thanks.